Welcome to Meet the Changemakers. I'm chartered psychologist Dr. Audrey Tang, and on this show I have the pleasure of talking to charities, causes and people who are campaigning to make a difference in the world. And today I'm joined by Diane Danzebrink and Andrea Swan of Menopause Support UK, who are campaigning to make menopause matter, and I'm going to be finding out why it is so important, not just because half the population will experience it, but actually it will also affect the other half too. Welcome to Meet the Changemakers.
Thank you for inviting us.
It's a pleasure to be able to chat with you and learn from you. I'd like to find out, because you're such an active campaigner and you've got all of your work, your website, all of those things, about understanding how menopause affects women. Mm-hmm. What are some of the main myths we need to be aware of? Let's start with the no-nos first.
There's lots of them, and I think one of the key myths around menopause is that it happens to women in their 50s. So we use the word menopause to essentially cover a transition period that for many begins in their early 40s, and that's called perimenopause. So peri meaning around the time of, but then before that you could have those who are experiencing a premature menopause. So 1 in 100 under 40 will experience a premature menopause, 1 in 1,000 under 30, and 1 in 10,000 under 20. So I think that's one of the huge myths, is that it doesn't happen to women until they're in their 50s. Actually, the symptoms that are probably going to be the most problematic for them where that happens is that they're going to probably happen in their early 40s for many of them. That everybody experiences symptoms, that's not true. Really? Yeah. 1 in 4 will experience almost no symptoms at all. 3 out of 4 will. 1 in 4 will call their symptoms debilitating. That the first thing to happen is that your periods will change. That's also not true. For many people, if they are going to experience symptoms, there'll probably be the psychological symptoms. Things like anxiety. I mean, anxiety is without a doubt the most reported symptom we hear.
Yeah, we did a poll recently, and that was the most common one people reported first, before hot flushes as well, wasn't it? Yeah.
So anxiety, low mood swings, becoming more emotional, and of course, as you will know, if you don't understand what's happening to you, what does it do? It increases your anxiety.
Yes, of course. This is the thing, and then that relates to another myth in a way, that it is all to do with the hot flushes. It's all you almost hear 1 or 2 key things. We don't talk about the mental health effects. We don't talk about the psychological changes. And with that, I think it becomes quite difficult for women to accept they're going through perimenopause or menopause, because they just think, oh, maybe I'm just a bit down, or maybe I'm just exhausted, or maybe I've got too much on.
And you're at that age where you might have teenage children, and your parents are getting a little bit older, and you're dealing with lots of other stuff, so you can always put it down to something else, can't you?
Yeah.
That's it. And then why do you think women are still reluctant then to even ask about whether it's perimenopause or the menopause?
Denial, I think. Denial at first.
I think that because menopause has historically been very much related to, well, if you're menopausal, it means you're getting old. I think that stops a lot of people from even wanting to say that they're in perimenopause. I think also, you know, perimenopause for far too long has been the butt of jokes. So for a lot of people, it's been something that they've kept to themselves. It's not something that we talk about. I mean, thankfully it's changing. We're doing it here. It's happening a lot more. But I think generally it's not something that's normalised in everyday conversation. It still has, to some extent, a bit of a stigma and a taboo. And I think, you know, we have to look at culturally as well. Within different cultures, you know, in some cultures there's no word for menopause. So how do you talk about it? If women's health is something that people are not encouraged to talk about generally, imagine then bringing menopause into the conversation.
This is very true. And going back to your point about how young women can be experiencing menopause,
Yep.
they could also be experiencing something else. It could be these symptoms might not be menopause, it might be endometriosis, it might be something completely different. Why is it so important, if you're just not feeling right, to get it checked?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because we've been talking since the Women's Health Strategy has been published. There's been a lot more talk about how women are essentially fobbed off when they are experiencing repeated abdominal pain or they're experiencing very heavy periods. And, you know, the guidance is that if you're having repeated very heavy periods, you should go and get that checked out. If you're experiencing lots of abdominal pain, that should be checked. But we know that, particularly for endometriosis, it takes on average around 8 to 9 years for that to be diagnosed in somebody. I mean, me personally, I didn't know, but I lived with the grade 4 endometriosis, which is the worst grade of endometriosis. I lived with that for over 15 years.
Is this a common thing that you see in women very much? We just need to get on with it.
I think you'd expect. I think you'd. My daughter had has endometriosis. She had it literally from when she started her periods, and I was always shocked at how much pain she was in. And I'd take her to the doctors, and they'd give her, is it transemic acid or something?
Yep.
And well, you know, this is just where your periods are, sort of thing. She'd have to have a day off school a month, and then eventually we sort of looked into it and thought this could be what it is, and we had to take a loan out and pay for her to have surgery to get it, because that was when she was 19, because otherwise this would have just gone on and on. She was missing work, and she, at 15 years old, she's told, well, this is just how your periods are going to be.
And that's the same, I think, when people go and ask about menopause and ask about their symptoms, or they present with anxiety and they're told, oh, maybe take some antidepressants or take something anti-anxiety. Now, before, we don't want to scare people, obviously, but are there some symptoms that we ought to look out for which are menopausal versus endometriosis versus anything else that it could be?
Yeah, so, I mean, at some point during the perimenopausal phase, periods will change. But if you're somebody who is in their, I don't know, your teens, your 20s, your 30s, and you've been having very heavy or painful periods, or in fact abdominal pain for a significant period of time, you know, if that's been going on for more than 6 months, that needs a referral. And I think what we need to do is we need to insist. We need to be saying, okay, so if you are not prepared to refer me, then I would like to see somebody else. And I think there's two things. I think there's this this idea that women should just put up with it. But I also think that there has historically been an issue, as Andrea said, with, well, that's just what your periods are like. No, really heavy periods or clotting or flooding, that is not normal. When you get into perimenopause, actually that might happen. But, you know, that will happen as part. But for other people, it will get much lighter, periods will get much further apart. But, you know, I think particularly for younger women, if you're having, you know, 3 to 6 months at a time where you're not having a bleed at all, or you're having basically anything that doesn't fit into a monthly cycle, and if that monthly cycle is, if it's painful or very, very heavy, then that certainly needs to be, you know, referred on to a gynaecologist. And it's unfortunate, but I think we do have to push.
Absolutely. And to help with that, you have created a symptom checker, which I know we've got an image of. Could you talk me through that a little bit, please, this symptom checker for menopause?
Well, we just asked everyone in our support group to give us their most common symptoms, or the ones that they had. So we just compiled them. We've got, I think there's about 32 on there, isn't there?
Yeah.
And then we've got a separate one for GSM, which is the genitourinary syndrome of menopause. So they're more the vaginal, vulval, urinary symptoms.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they range quite widely, don't they?
Yeah, symptoms generally break down into 3 areas: cognitive, psychological and physical. So cognitive is generally called brain fog, but means changes to memory or concentration. Psychological symptoms is anxiety, low mood, etc., mood swings, more emotional, might be more tearful, might be more angry, but also things like loss of confidence can come under the psychological symptoms. And then physical symptoms, so we've mentioned hot flushes a couple of times. Another myth is that everybody who has perimenopausal or menopausal symptoms will have hot flushes.
Yep.
For those who have symptoms, 20% will never have a hot flush. So that's not diagnostic. And then maybe some of the things that people would never associate with changing hormone levels, like changes to their hair, drying or thinning, dry eyes, dry mouth, changes to perhaps their gut and bowel function, really itchy skin, heart palpitations. Andrea mentioned the genitourinary symptoms. How the hell would you know if nobody's ever told you?
This is so true, because I have to say, on the hair thing, it was my hairdresser that picked up that the blonde wasn't taking. And that's when I then thought about it and thought, oh, better check some other symptoms. And now with the symptom checker, one of the key things that you want to do is actually get this up into not just women's toilets, but say men's toilets, so men learn about it as well. Because sometimes I know I might sit there and go, oh, I'm just in a bad mood. But it might be my husband can recognise, hang on a minute, that's a little bit different. That mood is not quite...
It's been going on a bit longer.
Yes. So why is it important that actually men or those around us in our families also know about this? Even if we're not understanding, perhaps we're going through menopause, can they help us?
I think it's important that we all know about it. You know, I think what we would really like to see is a public health campaign about menopause, so that we all learn about it the way that we learn about it's good for us to exercise or not to smoke, because it will affect approximately half of the population directly, but it will affect the other half indirectly. And I think it's fair to say that we certainly see quite a lot of women who say, actually, my husband noticed this first. It was actually him who picked up on it. So it might not be your husband, it might be your partner, it might be a colleague, it might be a friend. But even if you're not going to experience it directly, at some point in your life, you're going to know somebody who goes through it. And that could be your mum. It could be your teacher.
Or my hairdresser.
Exactly.
We do get quite a lot of men emailing in and saying that my wife won't accept that this could be it, but, you know, is there anything...
How can I help?
How can I help?
Yeah, so, you know, we've got... Diane's written something specifically for partners, Understanding Menopause for Partners, which is really helpful. It just explains what's going on and how you can support that person. But also I send them the symptom checkers so that they can show them to their partner and just say, look, these are all these things. You know, it might be worth a conversation.
And it opens a discussion. It makes it less taboo to talk about, less embarrassing, less frightening in a way. And now this is on your website. And one thing that I notice when we open your website and have a look is the Make Menopause Matter campaign. And so you are talking about, we do need a campaign. And it's about getting GPs trained. It's about having the health campaign. Tell me more about hashtag Make Menopause Matter. We're wearing our little bracelets here, and I have the badge as well. So I'm kitted up, but
and the mug.
Yes.
So how did it come about? Well, so originally, I mean, all of this originally came out of my own experience, which goes back to 10 years ago now. And because I didn't get the right help and support, once I had started to feel better, I wanted to know, was it just me who was really unlucky? So I started to research. And when I started to research, I came across an awful lot of people saying, I feel like I'm going mad, I feel so alone, I don't know who I am anymore. And I thought, well, this can't be right. You know, we're talking about half the population. And I remember on one occasion, in frustration, turning to my husband and saying, if I ever feel like me again, I'm going to make damn sure I do something to change it. And that's sort of where the idea for menopause support came from, because as Andrea says, a lot of what we do is information sharing, isn't it? But it sort of got to a point where I felt, it's all very well, this is great, we're supporting lots of people, but what we really need is we need to raise this nationally. And with all the people that we support, we hear very common things, don't we?
Yeah.
I can't get the right help and support from my GP practice. I am struggling in the workplace, or I can't get the right support in the workplace. And going back to what I said about none of us ever learn anything about it, it just makes common sense for it to be part of the RSE curriculum in schools.
Yes.
So back in 2018, I launched a campaign in Westminster with these 3 key aims. And amazingly, by July 2019, the Education Secretary had said, we will put menopause on the curriculum in schools in England from September 2020. Unfortunately for teachers, it happened right in the middle of a global pandemic.
Yeah.
But it's there and it will eventually embed. We're trying to create some resources to help that happen. And then we've just heard, because of the Women's Health Strategy, that all medical students will learn a mandatory module about menopause from the academic year 24-25. Things are definitely changing in the workplace.
Yes.
It's sort of happening
Yeah,
organically,
we're getting
isn't it?
much more inquiries about, or Diane, or just information and how they can support their colleagues, what they can do at work. Like setting up a menopause champion is quite a good idea, isn't it?
Yeah, and before we came here today, we had a meeting with another organisation about providing educational training for them in the workplace.
And that's getting
That's
busier and
happening
busier, isn't
more
it?
and more, isn't it? So we know that it's now on the curriculum in Scotland too. So we kind of feel that the one that's left to crack is to have a mandatory module for all current GPs and practice nurses.
Yes.
And I think we have to remember that GPs are really busy people.
Yes, absolutely.
They've been under a huge amount of stress. We know that far too many of them are leaving because of the pressures that they're under. So I think what we have to remember is that having not trained them properly in the first place, having not given them the training that they deserved, has actually done our GP population a disservice. But unfortunately, that has a knock-on effect to their patients. And of course, people don't become GPs not to be able to help their patients, do they?
Yes, yeah.
So I think it always has to go back to, okay, so who designed the training in the first place? Well, the training goes back to the medical schools. But now we have an enormous cohort of current GPs who we really need to provide some kind of easy to access free training module for.
Yes.
So for me, I think that, I mean, that's definitely that's our key goal, isn't
Yes.
it now?
Yeah. I think that's great. And you've already mentioned it's the training, it's the setting up the champion. I think that's a great idea. I know, Andrea, that when you started almost learning more about it, you invited friends over and then got Diane to talk. Having those little groups almost, informal chats.
Well, I just thought, when I saw the symptom checker, and I thought, oh my God, I've got so many of these, and I've been to the doctor separate times and it's never been connected. So I thought, well, and I read a lot of stuff, and I thought, well, if I haven't clicked, then a lot of my friends, so I just invited everyone around my age. Look, I'm just going to do this at my house, and they all came, and well, it always happens in Diane's talk, so you can see all these people going, oh, that's me, that's me.
Goodness, yeah.
I've got that.
And that's the thing, it's like with psychology, when you know and you can accept that there is an issue or something is not quite right, you can do something about it. And so that sort of relates...
And you've got the choice to do something.
Exactly, yes, exactly. It is always a choice. We're never forcing anything on anyone, but it is a choice, and that becomes an option. So I want to talk about why we actually do need to do something about it, because I know a lot of women are choosing to leave work and so on. But because we have been talking about loved ones asking, what can I do? And you've given some great ideas for organisations. Are there things that loved ones could do to help, or just to make you feel a little bit better?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as Andrea said, she has an awful lot of inquiries from men now, which is great. Which is really, really good. Saying, I think this might be happening to my partner or my wife. How can I help them? So, as she says, she sends our symptom checker out a lot, but she also sends out our guide of understanding menopause for partners. And I think some of the key things are, if you can open up that conversation But if you can be supportive, if you can be patient, if you can understand that this is going to be a movable feast, because just to give an indication, so with estrogen during perimenopause, it sort of can do something like this. It can go up and down over a period of for some people months, for other people years. So it can be that this can be changing. So symptoms today might not be the symptoms 6 months down the line. I think it's also about accepting that the person that you know and love is definitely there, but they're probably not really completely understanding what's happening to them. And also understanding and accepting take time, don't they?
Yes.
It doesn't happen overnight. And, you know, if you are experiencing that loss of confidence, particularly the psychological symptoms, you might not feel so sociable.
Of course,
That was one of my first ones, was social anxiety. I would cancel or try and get out of social events. And I didn't know why, but I just don't want to go.
And of course now, having been through the pandemic, it's very easy to start thinking, oh, it's just because we've been in lockdown for such a long time, it's easy to mistake things. That does relate to, when you're talking about loved ones understanding, it is about women understanding themselves and being kind to themselves as well, because women are leaving work because of this, aren't they? What's going on?
Tragically, that's true. Surveys show us generally that around 1 in 4 will consider leaving the workplace during perimenopause, and 1 in 10 actually do.
And these are women, actually, if we're talking about, say, late 40s to 50s, who have made it to the top of their careers. They've worked so hard, they've overcome imposter syndrome, they've overcome insecurity, they have proved themselves, and now they're saying, my body kind of is just turned against me.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think the other thing that's really important to recognise is, you know, in really key sectors, you know, in the health sector. So just over, I think the last survey that I saw was around 73% of our nurses are over their, I think the average age is around 43. So 73% of the sort of the care staff are over the age of 43, so that's bang on for perimenopause.
And there'll be senior care staff as well, won't there?
Yes.
So even more responsibility.
Yeah. And then if we're going to go on to lose 1 in 10 of them, our police officers, our teachers. So imagine being a teacher and having urinary frequency or urgency or really heavy periods. You can't leave a classroom of 30 kids on their own. How do you cope with that?
Yes.
And so for some of them, if they don't recognise it as related to menopause, or they can't get support in the workplace, tragically, they walk away. And I mean, we do have
some
situations...
have been sort of almost forced out as well, haven't they?
We do have situations where people will say, either I left my job or I left my relationship, and now I look back, I wish I'd known, because I wouldn't have done that. I would have sought help. I would have sought some support.
Because that's the thing, it can be dealt with. There are so many ways of dealing with menopausal symptoms. But this is why I know it's just in discussion, considering menopause to be a protected characteristic under discrimination, because there is a misunderstanding sometimes in the workplace. There is that almost that joke about, oh, she's on her period, no wonder no one wants to talk about it.
Just needs a little bit more kindness and understanding, and, you know, a bit of respect as well in some cases.
That's the key word, isn't it? It's respect. I mean, that brings me to my point about, you're great at raising awareness. A platform like this can raise awareness, but we also need to be doing and being kind, showing respect. Yes, that's a great start. What other things can we be doing to really help make menopause matter?
So I think from the point of view of, I mean, the first thing is talk about it. So if you've watched this today, go away and talk to people about what you've learnt and what you've been watching. So helping to raise awareness, normalising the conversation. Yes. That's really key. go and have a look at some of the resources on the website. So you mentioned the symptom checker. So the website is menopausesupport.co.uk. You can find lots of free resources on there to sort of help to upskill yourself, essentially. But then if you want to really help from a campaigning point of view, sign and share the campaign, which you can also find on the website. We would be thrilled if you'd do that. But then you can do other things. You can get in touch with your local MP and ask your local MP to raise this in Westminster. You can get in touch with your CCG and ask them what they're doing about menopause. Andrea, you've done something with your local GP practice, haven't you?
Yes,
You've joined the PCP.
Yeah, most GP surgeries have a patient participation group. So I just thought, oh, well, I'm going to join. And then they called me and said, well, what are you interested in? And I said, well, women's health. And they were, oh, yes, excellent. We've been wanting someone to do this. So we've got, they've got like a little slideshow on the screen in the surgery, and we've got something in the newsletter about it. And then there's going to be something on the website. Could it be menopause? Just, mainly raising awareness of some of the lesser known symptoms, and just saying, look, if you recognise any of this, book in with the doctor.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so and anyone can do that.
Yeah, because you're actively actually changing.
You're sort of going in that way.
Yes, no, that's fantastic. And now, as we come to a close, I mean, if you have one message to give to people about the importance of making social changes, doing something about it, what would you say?
Raise your voice. Absolutely raise your voice. The only thing that ever truly makes change is when grassroots community, raise their voices together and they're united in what they're asking for. But it doesn't happen quickly. Change takes time. It is a marathon, not a sprint. But don't think your voice doesn't count, because currently 180,000 people who have signed the Make Menopause Matter campaign have changed legislation forever.
That's amazing. That is absolutely incredible. And Andrea, what about you? Because you've been doing so much grassroots as well. What's your feeling on this? I
think just, as Diane said, just talk about it, normalise it so people don't feel uncomfortable. And there might be that one woman in the room who's been struggling and not understanding, and that conversation might change her life in a way, because she might think, oh, I'm not going mad, I'm not a freak or losing my mind. I just need to go to the doctors and have a talk about what's available and make a choice, but be informed about it,
and will potentially change the lives of everybody around her too.
I think that's a very powerful point to end this on. Thank you both so much for joining me.
Pleasure.
It was so great to chat with you. Next week, I'll be talking to Anne Wankuri of the United African Association and the fabulous Dancing Drums. But this week, make menopause matter, raise your voice and take action.